It could be said that you don't sell a game by its gameplay systems, but rather the fantasy that you promise on the back of the box. The player could be the unlikely chosen one destined to save the world, or caught in a world full of interesting characters and dramatic events. Moonlighter was developed by Digital Sun and released in 2018, and its main hook is that you're not just a typical adventurer killing bosses and raiding dungeons, but the items you bring home can be sold in a shopkeeper simulator, both halves reinforcing each other to make a greater whole. Moonlighter boasts an amazing in-game aesthetic, with an incredible amount of detail in its animation and its pixel art. Its music tracks are dynamically composed and change as you visit shopkeepers in town or advance floors in the dungeons. However, this isn't to say that gameplay systems aren't important, because they are the means that the player fulfills that fantasy. The greatest games craft systems to immerse the player in the worlds that they built. Moonlighter should be able to stand on the three pillars of its core fantasy: its combat, shopkeeping, and story/progression. Unfortunately, Moonlighter ends up crumbling on all these points due to lackluster execution, and it's also unable to make the two halves of its gameplay rewarding due to issues with its core design. I enjoy this style of game, but Moonlighter contains a shallow, grindy experience masked by its visuals, so while I can't recommend it, I can break down its flaws in hopes of improving any others that follow in its wake. Not every game is expected to have a significant story, so a lot of games dump you straight into active gameplay to set the player's expectations. Moonlighter starts with a short cutscene, accompanied by main scripted events to introduce the player's main motivation: completing the dungeons to unlock the secrets of the fifth door. There's also plenty of flavor text and NPC dialogue available throughout the game. I'd argue this primes the player to expect a narrative on par with the setup, so it's disappointing how little else is present until the very last moment of the game. The town of Renoka is your window into this world, but it doesn't feel lived in because everyone's designed to fill a function rather than have a personality. A majority of their dialogue is exposition or parroting your actions, while giving no insight into their background or daily lives. You could summarize every named character in just 2 words, since they only have one defining trait. Numerous times you talk to all the uniquely drawn NPCs, and yet find 2 of them right next to each other saying the exact same thing. With the exception of some odd cooking recipes, it feels like everyone got a memo and they're just reading off the same notes. This style of writing, combined with the lack of world building, makes the town feel shallow. To be clear, extra backstory was added in a patch, so perhaps it was not a priority during development. That's just a band-aid on the problem, however, as the story is heavily underdeveloped. I'm going to dissect the game's 2 storylines to demonstrate this. The game describes a conflict between heroes and merchants. Heroes roam those dungeons for glory, while merchants scavenge items for sale. Okay, so the game's trying to set up a class system, like the tale of a common peasant versus a privileged noble. The plan is that you start as a maligned merchant, eventually beating the dungeons to be recognized as a hero and respected by the entire town. However, it fails for a bunch of reasons. First, the game's tone requires that it explains the economy and livelihood of merchants, which it does. It then fails to do the same for heroes, because the typical fantasy hero economy doesn't work here, leaving a lot of unanswered questions. It also doesn't explain why the town considers heroes superior, despite merchants directly supporting the town, and heroes being self-centered. If the tone was directly confrontational, the conflict might seem believable, since the player would see it firsthand. Also, the conflict should have a cause, like competing over a resource or clashing ideals. But since the game ignores obvious pain points, while ruling out others, the only reason heroes despise merchants is because the game said so. This conflict should act as foreshadowing for a big event. In the game, the mother of this family was a hero that died to the Forest Guardian, causing the dungeons to close. So I sorted some kind of event where I challenged that reputation as a merchant, maybe return with an item or a trinket, or maybe her last words just to give resolution to her family and move on with the story. But not only was there no evidence that she existed, the only acknowledging dialogue is that her son is now upset because he wasn't the brave hero that took revenge. Near the end of the game, the entire town warms up to you and hails you as the hero merchant. But honestly, the message that both sides aren't so different rings hollow once you realize how pointless heroes are. They only exist so the game can pitch you as the underdog that overcomes this prejudice, but it barely existed in the first place. This entire plotline goes nowhere. On the same note, Moonlighter attempts to develop the worlds of its dungeons through item descriptions, but with poor execution. Not only do they take a really long time to scroll down, but they are literal descriptions told from a first-person perspective. This is a poor imitation of item descriptions in, say, Dark Souls that tell you new information about past events or culture, and are functional items to boot. The lore of each dungeon amounts to, "Hey, we're a civilization that did the thing our dungeon is named after. That's it." Which is really dull after the second time, with a few hints thrown in about some raiders. The foreshadowing for the fifth door is so minute that nothing happens until there's a huge exposition dump at the end, revealing that hidden behind the fifth door are alien pirates who stole from the other civilizations, and you've been using their technology. Which would have been a cool meta twist if it had been more than just a boss fight. Why do you care if the pirates wanted to take over the world? Why did you want to open the fifth door anyways? It's not a satisfying ending because the game lacks the world building to make you invested in any of this. Let's talk about the combat. You spend 80% of the game doing it and it's clunky. I'm not talking about the slowness of attacks, because that is intentional if you compare it to other games. Okay, so clunkiness is a little tricky to explain, so just bear with me as I break it down. While you can move in all 8 directions, you can only attack in the 4 major ones, especially if your weapon does not have an arc. A lot of enemies have contact damage, meaning that touching an enemy will cause the same amount of damage as if you were directly attacked. Damage is around 1/4 to 1/6 per hit with limited healing, so you like to avoid as much damage as possible. Now if I have an enemy in front of me, I have to be close enough to hit them, but not too close to get hit. Also, because there is no step forward in your initial attack, an advancing opponent can still hit you while performing your attack. If an enemy with contact damage is approaching from a diagonal, I can't counterattack. I need to run away and awkwardly reposition to fight them. If you would like to skillfully dodge close range attacks, that's awkward as well. The roll is too long to be used offensively, and rolling to dodge puts you outside counterattack range. Many enemies also have tracking that resets their attack windup, so you can't walk around attacks either. So all of that restricts where you can attack from, but your options for attacking are pretty limited. You equip 2 weapons, each with a combo and a charge attack, but you always end up using the 3-hit combo, because of the terrible trade-off in damage and the risk of charging into multiple enemies with your charge attack. The 3-hit combo sucks because of terrible input buffering, where you have to be very precise in pressing the attack button at the right time, otherwise you restart the combo from the beginning and lose your 3rd hit bonus. This meant I mashed the attack button the whole game, since that's easier than consistently getting the timing, and that hurt my fingers after a while. This isn't addressing the inconsistent hitboxes from your attacks missing enemies, or the lack of hit stun causing enemies to hit you during your attacks. Some enemies have terrible telegraphs, forcing you to dodge preemptively. But all enemies have slow erratic movement, meaning combat ends up being crowd control as you run away and pick off enemies from range. While combat intends to be thoughtful and methodical, you end up playing it super safe, since there are so many factors that make combat dangerous, but also monotonous and stale. Unless you pick the sword and shield because it's overpowered and breaks the combat. To understand the progression, let me walk you through my first few hours with the game. The first dungeon is straightforward, but there's no pushover to complete. You explore a random set of rooms, defeating enemies, collecting items, and avoiding obstacles like puddles and pits in order to reach the next floor. Higher floors have stronger enemies and more rooms, but since routes don't interconnect, there's a lot of backtracking and dead ends. The lack of shortcuts is frustrating, especially because every floor there's one lore room with no other loot, so there's only disappointment when you hear that jingle and have to backtrack to find the correct course. But stronger enemies drop better items, and what's particularly novel about Moonlighter's loot system is its inventory. You have to prioritize items based on your limited space, and rare items have curses like send this item home or destroy this item on the left that makes inventory management even more rewarding when you haul all of it home. You'll likely need more damage to beat the second floor mini-boss and advance further, so selling the items you found and using others to upgrade your weapons and armor will give you that final push. After completing the 3rd floor and defeating the golem boss after numerous tries, I thought progression felt pretty promising. I couldn't wait for all the new things in the rest of the game, That's the whole game. There is no more progression. Sure, there are 3 more dungeons to explore, but you will always go through exactly 3 floors with similar map layouts. You'll always find the same secrets, the same dead ends, and the same puddles to avoid. You'll always get to the second or third floor and need more damage, so you'll grind for the 2 items required to upgrade, and farm for the remaining gold. You've already seen all the unique item curses in the game, so it feels like you collect the same items, since their only difference is their price. Your only weapon upgrades are more damage or more damage with dot, but enemies in the next dungeon take the same amount of hits to kill, so you never feel any stronger. Unlike other roguelikes, you don't gain items that change how you attack, and unlike RPGs, you don't learn any new spells or skills to use. You're going to be doing that same 3-hit combo for the entire game. This is by far the worst aspect of the game, that there is no real progression past the first quarter. Bosses are a rare highlight, but no other system offsets the lack of progression. As we enter the latter half of this critique, I'm going to be bringing up a lot of comparisons to Reciteer, developed in 2007 and considered the creator of this genre. It has a ton of charm, and while it has issues that I won't get into here, it has a strong foundation that makes it worthwhile, making it a great reference point for this critique. When I first showed this image, I had time management as the bow to the 2 halves, and it's important to explain why that's essential. Reciteer has a debt system, where you need to make a payment by the end of the week, and I understand why this time pressure will be removed, as it will seem crushing to new players. However, its removal severely cripples the core loop, because you require risk and reward to force the player to make interesting decisions. It's like a shortcut in a racing game. If it's not faster, then it's not a shortcut. But if it's just as safe as the track, then it gets boring as you make the same decision over and over again. For time management, Moonlighter has a day and night cycle, but it heavily incentivizes you into adventuring at night, because various town activities, including opening your shop, can only be done by day. So in a debt system, you might take greater risks dungeoning at night, so you can meet your goal at the end of the week, leading to interesting choices. But since Moonlighter doesn't have that restriction, if you die at night, you lose no opportunity cost, and can retry without penalty. The closest you get to management is customer requests, where you need to plan ahead and get a certain resource for a scheduled date. But since the request can come from the cheaper, previously completed dungeon, and enemy kill requests often require multiple successive dungeon runs. Why do that when you can easily make the same or more from running the newest dungeon in the regular way? Sure, this misses the point of a shop management game, but you still make money this way, and actually, hey, here's your little secret. Moonlighter doesn't have any management. Items are just gold, so who cares? Just don't manage anything, stockpile your items until you can upgrade, and beat the dungeon. Because of this, there is no longer interplay between the 2 halves, as dungeon clearing is the only obstacle to complete the game. Later on, you can sidestep selling items entirely for a 30% cut excluding tips, so you can earn a steady income while not having to deal with any of the shop mechanics. The truth of the shop is that it ends up being an obstacle to progression, rather than evolving alongside it. Finally, let's talk about the shop. In Moonlighter, you either use items for upgrades, or you sell them here. So you think there will be interesting choices to make, maximizing each sale and breaking up the monotony. After all, buy low, sell high is core to this concept. So in Moonlighter, every new item has an unknown price that you need to discover. This is much less interesting than it sounds. You tend to sell a new item one by one, watching the customer reaction and adjusting the price in a game of hot and cold. It's a well done action that's curious if you don't know something is valuable, but it's pretty pointless when you realize all items are ordered by price. In comparison, Reciteer, all item prices were already known, but you had to haggle for each item sold. This allowed for a player meta narrative, where you need to know the buy power of your customers, and could under/oversell based on your debt payment. And what you're going to start to see here is a trend, where in Moonlighter, you do the same thing over and over again, while Reciteer has systems that change things frequently. For example, Reciteer also had market trends that changed the prices of entire item categories, so you could buy low and sell high later. Back to Moonlighter, its popularity system only triggers if you oversell the same item multiple times in a row, which means once you find a good price, you can sell at that price forever without consequence. So, how do you pick what items you're going to sell in Moonlighter? Just sell the most expensive and work down. In Reciteer, well, let's make a list. Market trends, upcoming debt payments, customer preferences, customer budget, adventure equipment, shop atmosphere, window items, and so on. Should you save your items to craft weapons to make more money? Actually, the completed weapon costs less than its cost, so just toss item crafting out the window. Just sell the item instead. Item Fusion in Reciteer does this properly. What about the different kind of customers in Moonlighter? What about heroes who only buy weapons and potions? Well, I already explained why weapon crafting is terrible, so just ignore them and sell the item. These can steal items, so maybe you have to balance risk between catching them or checking out customers at the counter? Nope, since they clearly announced their presence, you can just stand in front of the counter and do both. What about rich customers, who ignore prices and buy no matter the cost? Well, that's kind of interesting. So you can overprice an item, hoping a rich customer will buy it first. Oh wait, they pick at random. Just sell it for regular price then. Finally, Moonlighter has very little shop customization, outside increasing the shop size, and adding plain stat bonuses to tips and customers. Raw Reciteer had plenty of dynamic systems, including the score, shop customization, and events. Since you can ignore every system, and shopping phases can take up to 15 minutes, the simple strategy of selling expensive items at a normal price is both optimal and boring in Moonlighter. As I conclude this long video, I want to address one counterpoint that's popular in other reviews. The notion that, well, you didn't find the game challenging. It's a relaxing game with a simple routine at its core, so claiming it's badly designed is missing the point. Now, I would love to present my dissertation on video game difficulty, but we only have 2 minutes left, so I'll give it a bridge version for Moonlighter specifically. Firstly, the recommended difficulty is hard, where you typically die in 3 to 5 hits. Moonlighter is also from the roguelike genre, which is known for its hard gameplay and resetting large amounts of progression upon death, sometimes at the very beginning. Many of its design issues are relevant to difficulty as it suffers from a lack of engaging content, but its management systems also lack a slider to appease players looking for a challenge. To say the intended difficulty is easy would be inaccurate. Secondly, Moonlighter's design is grindy, but it doesn't match relaxing games like Animal Crossing or The Sims in that genre. Those games have idle management systems under light time constraints, providing a lot of creative and social aspects for players to enjoy and progress. Moonlighter has very limited linear progression, and its gameplay loop is a punching combat system, which matches other roguelites like FTL or Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. Moonlighter feels amateur and unfinished. It wants to be a roguelike with RPG elements, but fails to have the progression or the gameplay that makes those genres interesting. The game loops on itself after its first quarter as if incomplete. Its story isn't told well enough, and the management mechanics don't reward the player for planning. I took a lot of time reflecting on Moonlighter before writing this, because I had high expectations that tainted my initial impression. Therefore, I was exhaustive in this video to prove a critical point. Excluding audio-visual, every pillar has been executed significantly better than another game, and without interplay, it's less than the sum of its parts. When I was fighting, I wish I was playing Hyperlight Drifter. When I was shopkeeping, I wanted to play Reciteer. When I was reading the story bits, I wanted to play anything else really. The bar is pretty low for that one. I can only hope that this video builds a better foundation, and thus a better game, in this genre's future. Thanks for watching.